that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the King, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This meeting of the Honorable Senate of Jamaica for Friday, November 4, 2022 is called to order. And before we begin the business of the day, members would have no doubt noted the presence of a number of young Jamaican leaders with us this morning, as well as them being accompanied by Mr. Roger Mitchell, who is the Caribbean head of the International Republican Institute. Now, they are here today as a result of their participation in a program which culminated in it's actually a 16-week leadership diploma course, and it culminated with a conference in the Dominican Republic, which was attended by some 20 leaders from the Caribbean, Belize, Jamaica, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago all participated. And indeed our own Senator Natalie Rodriguez Campbell participated in the program in the Dominican Republic. I must say, if I am permitted to say so, that I was extremely impressed with the intellectual capacity, dedication, and motivation of the young Jamaicans who I met this morning. So I am particularly happy to welcome you to the Parliament this morning and hope that you enjoy your stay with us. So welcome. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Yes. Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Ministry Paper number 89 of 2022 entitled Jamaica Customs Agency Annual Reports for years ended March 31, 2014 and March 31, 2015. Ministry Paper number 90 of 2022 entitled the Jamaica Planning Institute, entitled the Planning Institute of Jamaica Annual Report for the financial year ended December 31, 2022. Ministry Paper number 91 of 2022 and resolution entitled Government Guarantee of Loan in the amount of $1,401,100,000 from the First Caribbean International Bank, Jamaica Limited, to the National Water Commission, as well as the list of government guaranteed loans as at September 30, 2022, and annual report and audited financial statement of the Jamaica Bauxite Institute Limited for the financial year 2017-2018.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honourable Senate, I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the first day of November 2022, a bill entitled An Act to Validate and Confirm the Acts of the National Irrigation Commission Limited, done in good faith by persons acting on behalf of the National Irrigation Commission Limited, its agents and its officers against liability for actions done in good faith and for connected matters, was passed in the House of Representatives. Signed, Marisa Dalrympe Philibert, CD, MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
Thank you, Minister.
A bill shortly entitled the Irrigation, Validation and Indemnity Act 2022, read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Thank you very much, Minister. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally. Question.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Whereas Section 19 of the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act 2022 provides that the Minister may, by order subject to affirmative resolution, declare a firearms amnesty if the Minister is satisfied that A, the amnesty may result in the reduction in the number of illegally possessed firearms or ammunition in Jamaica, and B, it is in the public interest to declare the amnesty, and whereas on the first day of November 2022, the Minister made the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction, Regulation, Firearms Amnesty Order 2022, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Firearms Amnesty Order 2022 Resolution. 2. The Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Firearms Amnesty Order 2022 is hereby affirmed. Sorry, Mr. President. Mr. President, can I ask that you recommit? There's an issue with the document.
I beg your pardon?
You recommit, there's an issue with the document. I'm withdrawing it, President, and I will ask that you recommit a little later. I'm asking to draw the motion as table, and I will recommit later if you would be so kind.
Drawing the motion that you started there.
Yes,
and
yes, President.
At another time, you'll ask that it be recommitted.
Yeah, yes, if you'd be so kind, President.
Okay.
Sorry. Let me show you that.
Yes. The leader of the Senate is required. Those in favor of that? Thank you. Minister, you have any in relation to your legislation? Okay. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to continue with the State of the Nation debate, or rather to resume the State of the Nation debate suspended at our last sitting, and to continue with contributions both from myself and Senator Floyd Morris. It is my understanding that on the return of Senator Samuda, and perhaps after both presentations, we will also seek recommittal of notices of motion given orally to permit the resolution in respect of the firearm amnesty to be taken at that time. Mr. President, before I take my seat, however, I also would crave your leave to recognize this morning, present also in the gallery, the Permanent Secretary and senior staff members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And although I will thank them when I speak later, I think just acknowledging their presence now I wish to welcome them all.
Minister,
Thank
can
you.
I invite them to sit in the well of the Parliament? They can sit over here. Eh? Yes, we will find space for them. No, I'm speaking about your ministry staff, you know. Yeah. The permanent. Yes, there's place here. Madam Permanent Secretary, would you join us, please? It's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs staff who are coming down. Would you can join us, please? Mr. Luton. Senator Morris, I think that Senator Morris? When you're ready, you can begin, sir. For that, Senator Brown? Yeah, Senator Morris, I'm going to wait until the Ministry of Foreign Affairs staff come down.
No. I mean the song.
You know, they have been giving trouble. It's not working.
It's okay. They're good. Yeah, man, we're good now. You're good? You're good, guy? Hmm? You're and everything? Yeah, man. Alright. So when I'm ready, you know. They're ready.
And thank you very much for your patience, members. Senator Floyd, Dr. Senator Floyd Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to also add my quote of welcome to the members in the gallery and the senior staff from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And I want to start off my presentation, Mr. President, by acknowledging, the goodness of God and His continued blessings on me as an individual and the way how He has guided my life to the point where I am standing here in this honorable chamber. I also, Mr. President, would like to acknowledge my best friend and the significant person in my life who is unavoidably absent today because she had a medical appointment. And so I speak of my wife, Shellyan, who I am indeed happy to regard as my soulmate and best friend. And her support for me has been tremendous. And I want to also acknowledge the tremendous support of the staff and members of the University of the West Indies that continue to give me support at that illustrious institution that this weekend will be graduating over 4,000 individuals from that institution. Mr. President, it is my absolute pleasure to make another State of the Nation presentation in the Senate. This year, I have the distinct honor of serving this honorable chamber for 20 years. I am indeed grateful to former Prime Ministers P.J. Patterson, Portia Simpson-Miller, and leaders of the opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips and Mr. Mark Golding, for the confidence they have reposed in me to give service to this great country. The records will show that I have made a continuous and significant contribution to the Senate in those 20 years, whether it is questions to be asked, motions to be debated, legislation to be introduced, and as a former President of the Senate, signing of over 100 pieces of legislation and hosting dignitaries to the Parliament. And, Mr. President, how could I not include the countless effort at bringing the plight of persons with disabilities to this chamber? Indeed, it is such efforts that resulted in the signing and ratifying of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007, the introduction of sign language in the Parliament in 2014, and the passage of the Disabilities Act in 2014. So, Mr. President, I am indeed grateful for the opportunity to participate and make my contribution to our country through the Senate. This year, I would like to focus on the topic, Time Come to Build an Accessible and Inclusive Society. Mr. President, when I speak about an accessible and inclusive society, I am speaking about building a society in which all the citizens have equal opportunities to participate and contribute to the development of that society through their God-given talents and ability. Ultimately, this must redound to Jamaica becoming the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. In this presentation, therefore, I would proffer an analysis of the current state of the nation, where we are coming from, what are some of the efforts that have been made by my political organization to deal with some of the challenges and put forward some solutions to deal with the problems bedeviling our country. In 2022, there are some worrying trends in the state of our nation. Crime has escalated out of control, and the citizens are extremely fearful. Our education system is in chaos, with teachers migrating in droves. Indiscipline permeates every sector of the society, and sometimes we wonder if we are living in a banana republic. Corruption is on the increase, with over 50% of the citizens saying that the government is corrupt, the highest rating ever given of any political administration on this issue in modern polling data. Roads across the country are in a deplorable condition, contributing to citizens taking out their frustration by blocking roads. There is a significant pileup of garbage in communities, and it is a national eyesore. Landlessness and shortage of shelter has encompassed the country, with more and more citizens capturing crown lands. Mr. President, considering my current portfolio responsibilities as the opposition spokesman on housing and sustainable living, I would want to zero in on the latter situation. This is because the issue of landlessness and lack of shelter has affected our citizens ever since the abolition of slavery in 1838. When slavery was abolished in Jamaica in 1838, the freed men and women were released from the plantation without any form of compensation. Worst of all, they were never compensated for the years of forced labor and brutal exploitation. Instead, some of these freed men and women were forced to capture crown lands, or churches aided them to live and work in what is regarded as free villages. The situation for the owners of plantation was totally different. The government of Britain instead compensated the plantation owners for the losses they would have suffered from the abolition of slavery. In fact, Mr. President, the government of Britain took a loan of £20 million to compensate all the plantation owners in the British Commonwealth that suffered losses because of the abolition of slavery. The government of Britain finally paid off this debt in 2018. This is 180 years after slavery was abolished. The freed men and women were thus forced to live in deplorable conditions in the post-slavery era. In fact, the situation of landlessness, lack of shelter, low wages, and poverty contributed to the Morant Bay Rebellion in 1864. Paul Bogle, now one of our celebrated national heroes, was forced to march from St. Thomas to Spanish Town to demand better living conditions for the black masses. A march that ultimately led to his death as he was hanged by the then governor. Yet, this uprising never brought any sustainable improvement in the situation of the black masses and the country in general. By 1938, the country was at another boiling point. Workers on the plantation engaged in another massive national uprising against the depressing and oppressive living and working conditions of workers across the country. From Frome in Westmoreland to Yallas in St. Thomas, and from Vere in Clarendon to Frontier in St. Mary, workers revolted against the government as they demanded improvements in their working and living conditions. Indeed, this was to usher in a modern political and labor movement which saw the formation of trade unions and political parties. By 1962, we pressed for and obtained political independence at Norman Manley. We are now 60 years old, and the vagaries of colonialism and slavery continues to haunt us. The issue of landlessness and inadequate shelter continues to plague our society. You see, Mr. President, we have not dealt with in an unassailable manner the issues emanating from slavery. Thus, the issues of squatting, especially that of on crown lands, remains pervasive. Therefore, you have situations such as that taking place in Clifton and Pleasant Hill in St. Catherine. It is conspicuous, Mr. President, that nowhere in this country where the black masses have seen improvements in their living conditions that they have chosen to trespass on the land of others. Nowhere in this country where the black masses have seen improvements in their economic conditions are their houses in a deplorable condition. Once these citizens see an improvement in their living conditions, the pride in them as black Jamaicans inspire them to live within the confines of the law. Therefore, Mr. President, I am outraged and disgusted by the Prime Minister's instruction to bulldoze the houses of those individuals who were scammed into purchasing crown lands in Clifton. I am also annoyed by the notices that were given to citizens in Pleasant Hill, St. Catherine, to vacate lands that they have occupied and called home for over 70 years. We are not a banana republic, and we are governed by the rule of law. If individuals capture and build on government lands, there is a process that must be followed to reclaim the land. This involves an investigatory process and a mechanism to catch the criminals who are involved. The Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms 2011, Section 3H and R, gives every citizen the following rights: the right to equitable and humane treatment, and the right to due process as provided in Section 16. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the Prime Minister and the Executive the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. You cannot enforce the law by breaking the law. And what is most egregious, it is when the Prime Minister, who the law gives no locus in this instant matter, leading the charge. But I am not surprised by the actions of the Prime Minister, as he has been consistent in tinkering with the very Constitution he swears to uphold and protect. We have seen it in the matter of undated letters that were signed by senators, some of whom are present here today. We have seen it in the NIDS legislation that his administration brought to Parliament in 2017. And we have seen it in the consistent use of states of emergencies as a crime-fighting initiative that trampled on the rights of some citizens. Mr. President, these actions by government does not inspire confidence in the political process. Our citizens have become cynical of us as leaders, the entire system of government they see as only enforcing the rules for expediency. We must therefore move to build an accessible and inclusive society in which all our citizens can feel as if they are first-class citizens. Time come, Mr. President, for this matter to be dealt with in a preeminent manner. Over the years, various administrations have implemented diverse housing projects to improve the living conditions of Jamaicans. However, in the context of my presentation, I will focus on a sample of projects implemented by PNP administration. Let us never forget that it was the Right Excellent Norman Manley in the 1950s that introduced the first set of housing schemes in the island. Mona, Hope Pastures, and Harbour View are among these seminal achievements. Thousands of Jamaicans own their homes through this housing initiative. Indeed, these housing developments triggered the establishment of a new middle class in Jamaica. Then in the 1970s, the venerable and indefatigable Most Honorable Michael Manley triggered the housing transformation in Jamaica. This was led by the creation of the National Housing Trust in 1976. Between 1976 and 1980 alone, over 40,000 housing units were delivered to Jamaicans. The era of the thatch houses and the wattle and daub was coming to an end, thanks to the visionary housing policies of Michael Manley. According to the NHT, Mr. President, over 110,000 houses have been built by the National Housing Trust during its 45-year existence. In the 1990s, the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson embarked on one of the most commendable and comprehensive initiatives to deal with the historical injustices of slavery. This initiative, the Program for Resettlement Integrated Development Enterprise, commonly known as Operation Pride, was established in 1994. Some of the objectives of the program included the resolution of a shelter needs of most low-income Jamaicans through the establishment, newly planned settlements, and the upgrading of existing settlements, the improvement of environmental and public health conditions in settlements throughout the country, and the mobilization of resources in the informal sector towards their own improvement, employment creation, and national development. The Operation Pride project delivered over 58,000 titles and certificates of possession to ordinary Jamaicans across the island. We can proudly say, Mr. President, Pines of Karachi, developed by PJ, Wentworth in St. Mary, developed by PJ, Mount Edgecombe in St. Anne, developed by PJ, Luana in St. Elizabeth, developed by PJ, Melrose News in Manchester, developed by PJ, Langston Apartment in St. Andrew, developed by PJ. Mr. President, we make absolute no apologies about the Operation Pride, developments. Ask if there were problems, I say emphatically yes. Ask if there were questionable decisions, I would say probably. However, Mr. President, Operation Pride brought significant benefits to thousands of Jamaicans. To thousands of Jamaicans who would not have received the chance to own a piece of this rock.
Mr. President, I'm asking for protection, sir. For the Speaker.
You want to take a seat and allow Senator.
I've been securely interrupted.
We'll never do. Your man is
Mr. President, we in the PNP create opportunities for the small man to gain access to and be included in the society by implementing initiatives such as Operation Pride. We don't take prime agricultural lands and give it to the already real rich to farm, and then they take to want to build houses. We don't take agricultural land and give to the rich and bulldoze the small man house. And Mr. President, we don't take prime land and give to individuals for projects like spring planes, and then they end up producing other things. Mr. President,
we don't defend
one cannot Mr. President, one cannot forget that the Portia Simpson Miller-led administration also executed housing initiatives for the poor and marginalized. We cannot forget that it was this iconic leader that built hundreds of houses for sugar workers, taking them out of barracks, which is a disturbing reminder of the vestiges of slavery. And the Jamaica Emergency Employment Program, JEEP, also brought houses to poor and marginalized individuals across Jamaica. It is estimated, Mr. President, it is estimated, Mr. President, that to adequately deal with the housing needs of our country, we must produce over 20,000 units annually. This will require a mixed approach, taking into consideration the partnership of both government and the private sector. We are operating in an era of climate change, and we must take serious consideration of how houses are built and what amenities with them. Resultantly, we must ensure that houses that are built are accessible, smart, and resilient. Mr. President, data is showing our senior citizens' population hovering around 13%, and this is expected to increase over the next couple of years. Our population of persons with disabilities is about 15%. When these two groups are conflated, we have a significant 28% of the population. We therefore must build houses that are accessible and must take into the consideration the needs of these individuals. Therefore, housing units without stairs, accessible toilets, wash basins, and bathrooms with grab rails are preeminent for these individuals to have sustainable living. The issue of climate change has brought into sharp focus the need for establishing smart housing. We need to build houses that will conserve and harvest water. We need to build houses that conserve on energy. We need to ensure that houses are built with internet connectivity. There is no way that modern houses should be built without these facilities if we want our people to enjoy sustainable living. Climate change has brought into luminous focus the need for us to build resilient houses. The recent destruction of houses in Florida, brought about by Hurricane Ian, is a strong reminder of the urgent need to build houses that are resilient. We are living in a geographical location where we are susceptible to hurricanes, volcanoes, earthquakes, and anthropogenic disasters. We must ensure that the design and material that goes into construction of our houses are able to manage these eventualities. Recognizing these existential issues relating to housing in Jamaica, a future PNP administration will be prepared to do the following. 1. Restore the National Housing Trust to its core mandate of providing affordable housing to the workers of Jamaica. 2. Provide a real rent-to-buy initiative where contributors to the NHT can own their own homes. Who rent a home, rather, can purchase that home over time. 3. Mobilize all available resources to provide accessible housing for the most marginalized in the Jamaican society. 4. Partner with civil society groups such as the church, organization of persons with disabilities, and senior citizens groups to build affordable and accessible housing for extremely marginalized individuals. And 5, to reinstitute the subsidy on interest rates for loans, teachers, senior citizens, persons with disabilities, and civil servants. Mr. President, the varied conditions that I have adumbrated above have undoubtedly created a Jamaica where some citizens are treated as a second-class citizens. Thus, there is a large band of Jamaicans who continue to be apathetic towards the political process. Such a situation was most manifest in the 2020 elections, where 63% of the voting population abstained from the polls. These citizens do not conceive a Jamaica that is working for them, as they are excluded from the mainstream of society. Senior citizens feel isolated because their basic healthcare needs and social protection are not being satisfied. Women believe that their efforts to make a decent living are not being realized. Men believe that they are being marginalized because of lack of economic opportunities. Persons with disabilities believe that discrimination is institutionalized. Residents in communities such as Clifton and Pleasant Hill believe that because they are poor, the state has no respect or regard for them. So, Mr. President, we have our work cut out for us to restore hope and create a more inclusive society. A society where our senior citizens are included and provided with quality health care and social protection. An inclusive society where our women, when they work, they are duly rewarded for their efforts. An inclusive society where our men can once again feel empowered and see their dignity preserved. A society where persons with disabilities can efficaciously participate in every sector of society. In every sector of society. And a society where when decisions are taken that will impact on the marginalized communities, for example, the people are included in the process. This is what is required to build an inclusive society and restore faith and hope in our systems of government. Finally, Mr. President, I want to give a tangible example of an accessible and inclusive society. Whenever I travel overseas, I pay keen attention to my environment. I do so because I always want to learn new things and to see what can be adopted for Jamaica. In my most recent UN assignment to Switzerland, I was always out in the communities interacting with the people. Here I got the opportunity to see accessibility and inclusion at work all over the country. Access and inclusion is inscribed in the society. The sidewalks are built to accommodate persons with disabilities, senior citizens, pregnant and lactating mothers, joggers, cyclists, and individuals attending the grocery store. Mr. President, it is the easiest that I have moved around in any country.
You could see your way around.
Public transportation is extraordinary. I could stay in my hotel that is 1 minute away from the bus stop. And once I reach the bus stop, the bus would be waiting for me. It spends 5 minutes at the bus stop, and thereafter it is off to its next destination, even if it is one person in it. And, Mr. President, all the buses are accessible to persons with disabilities.
Minister?
Hold on.
No, man. I'm not sitting.
Mr. President, the Speaker's time having expired, might it be extended to allow him to complete his presentation?
Thank you very much. Members will have heard the question. Those in favor? Again, Senator Morris, continue, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister. Buildings, Mr. President, are fully accessible to persons with disabilities and any other citizens with mobility challenges. The elevators have braille inscription and voice recording to indicate where you are in the elevator. Most notably, Mr. President, is the courteous nature of the people. Mr. President, time comes for us to create a Jamaica of this nature. We can do it. What it requires is the political will and a serious determination by all to make the society accessible and inclusive for all. Consequently, time comes for the Disabilities Act to be fully implemented. The effective date came on February 14th, and I commend Minister Samuda for his effort in this regard. But the different components...
That's not this Samuda, it's the other one, right?
Yes. But the different components of the legislation must be brought to life so that we can start reaping the benefits of this progressive piece of legislation. Time come for us to modernize the Constitution of Jamaica as it relates to persons with disabilities. The negative nomenclatures relating to disability must be removed in any reforms to this new Constitution. Time come for us to enforce the Building Act with the Building Code so that public facilities can become more accessible and inclusive of all citizens. A strategic approach must be adopted by the local authorities to get both old and new buildings fully accessible to persons with disabilities.
Including this parliament.
Time come,
Including this parliament.
including this parliament.
And promises have been made.
Time come for us to provide owners of buildings at the local level with incentives to make their facilities accessible and inclusive. One way that this can be done is to provide a discount on property tax for a period of time to any entity that provides access and inclusive facilities for persons with disabilities and senior citizens and others with mobility challenges. Time come for us to build an accessible and inclusive society where persons with disabilities are included in the labor market. I see the government postulating that unemployment is below 7%. However, this is not impacting on the population of persons with disabilities. In fact, Mr. President, all the studies that have been done have shown unemployment of persons with disabilities hovering around 90%. Persons with disabilities are not captured in this data, as employment is calculated based on those who are actively seeking employment at a given time. Persons with disabilities have withdrawn from the labor market due to the high levels of discrimination they face in Jamaica, and the government must pay attention to this. It is an existential challenge for these individuals, and it must be addressed if they are to be meaningfully included in the Jamaican society. The government must therefore incentivize the private sector to employ more persons with disabilities. Time comes for us to engage in a massive public education program to ensure that members of the society understand that it is perfectly acceptable to be different, and that providing an accessible and inclusive society benefits all. It benefits senior citizens. It benefits pregnant and lactating mothers. It benefits sporting enthusiasts. It benefits shoppers. It benefits our children. Let us all work together to build an accessible and inclusive Jamaica, one in which we are all able to live, work, raise our families, and do business. Time come. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Time come for the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And I just bring it to your attention that notwithstanding the fact that she has had almost 10 years of experience in the Senate, this is her first contribution in the State of the Nation debate. So I thank Senator Dr. Floyd Morris and recognize Minister Johnson Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. And I too wish to start this morning by giving thanks to God for good health and strength, and indeed the honor of standing here today to make this contribution to the State of the Nation debate. I'm going to channel his spirit of peace as well, and only maybe mention one or two things which Senator Morris spoke to in his presentation, but it's important that I not be distracted unduly, because the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has not been spoken about sufficiently within this chamber. And I am hoping today to even give just the smallest insight into the volume and scope of what it is that we do. And I couldn't do that if I were to answer all of the things which I might instinctively seek to do. I want to also, Mr. President, say how immensely grateful I am for the unwavering support of my husband, Jason, and my wider family, whose encouragement gives me the drive to serve, as well as my office family and team, who protect, administer, and enable me in my duties every day. Mr. President, I express my appreciation to Prime Minister the Most Honourable Andrew Holness for his continued confidence in my performance as a member of this Honourable Senate, in which I will have served for 13 years next month. 13 years. And for his continued confidence in my stewardship of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, which I am privileged to have served for now almost 7. I want to express also, Mr. President, my deepest appreciation for the support of my Senate colleagues, my cabinet, and indeed my wider parliamentary colleagues. I am proud to serve beside a dedicated team such as yourselves, who only ever want the best for Jamaica. Mr. President, I'm grateful for the spirit of collaboration that extends broadly to every member of this chamber, for their active participation in the role we perform in the legislative process. I'm pleased and proud to say that since 2016 we have passed 237 pieces of legislation, counting bills and resolutions within this House. And I'm honoured to have piloted 153 of them, 93 bills and 60 resolutions, but who's counting? This has fallen across, Mr. President, various portfolios and ministries, and sometimes it's easy to get lost in the myriad of subjects that we cover and forget of what we have accomplished. So I want to recall that we have passed the Jury Amendment Act to allow for more efficient delivery of justice. In 2017, we established the Integrity Commission to promote, strengthen measures for the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution of acts of corruption in public life. We also passed the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency Act, which created Jamaica's first fully independent law enforcement agency, informally started by Senator Bunting, who is now in this place, but when he was elsewhere, he started putting the MOCA together. We passed the law that entrenched it and, of course, established both bodies, staffed them, and provided the budgets. MOCA today is able to celebrate over 1,200 arrests and $1.7 billion worth of assets seized. And I might just take this time to recognize that while I hear or heard the Senator's reference to his view of corruption, I want to state quite clearly that not only has this administration done more than any previous administration in respect of strengthening our mechanisms to prevent and fight corruption where it is found, but we have also been internationally recognized as, under the opposition, starting from 2012, the score on the Corruption Perception Index was 38, and since 2017 it has been 44. So we are clearly perceived as less corrupt than the opposition has been during our tenure. importantly, because of the work that has been done by the Integrity Commission, by MOCA, the new Public Bodies Management Authority Act regulations, it is because that action has been taken when it has been merited. It is because we have strengthened the anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism regulations. We have strengthened the corporate governance frameworks and corporate law in respect of prevention of corruption. Mr. President, were I to continue to speak about all that we have done, again, I would give a very different presentation today. But, Mr. President, we have also passed the Tourism Workers Pension Act, which allows tourism workers to look forward to a financially secure retirement, including not only hotel workers, but those related to the tourism sector, such as craft workers, vendors, tour operators. This is groundbreaking work. Mr. President, we have passed the Data Protection Act and the National Identification and Registration Act, which together will not only assist in ensuring that we're able to digitize Jamaica in the way we need to harness and empower our young people and ensure they are ready to take the opportunities which the future presents. But we also have passed the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act to stamp out sexual harassment in the workplace, in institutions, and at places of accommodation, to empower and protect our women and ensure that they are also able to economically empower themselves. Mr. President, the Judicature, I hope so too, the Judicature Appellate Jurisdiction and granted the limited right of appeal to prosecution in criminal proceedings in the Parish Court and Supreme Court, again has reflected its first victory just recently, Mr. President, where the light sentence that was granted to a convicted murderer has been overturned on appeal and an appropriate sentence granted where he will be unable to seek parole before 26 years. Mr. President, again, I could give a very different presentation, but it is not my intention today. We have passed the Bank of Jamaica Amendment Act to authorize the BOJ to issue central bank digital currency as legal tender locally. The rollout of JAMDEX forms just a part of our approach to modernizing and digitizing our economy, and we look forward to the continued work in that regard. We passed the Road Traffic Amendment Act, the Road Traffic Amendment Act, the Road Traffic Regulations, and the Transport Authority Amendment Act, all of which together, as we anticipate they're coming into full effect, should bring law, order, and discipline to our roads. Mr. President, without going very much further, I will only mention the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act 2022, which will strengthen the fight against gun crimes, which, as we know, comprise the majority of murders in our country. Mr. President, in this context, I would therefore like to recognize the hard-working teams at the Office of the Parliamentary Council, the Attorney General's chambers, the legal officers and technical teams in the ministries, departments and agencies across the piece, and of course the excellent staff here at Gordon House and our support teams who ensure that our work here is efficient and effective. I'm pleased and honoured, as I am sure we all are, to continue to play a role in guiding these matters through the process as this government seeks to deliver on its promise to build a stronger economy, deliver better governance, security and justice for all, and to build a digital Jamaica, a stronger, inclusive Jamaican society of which we can all be proud. Mr. President, for its part, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade continues to play a critical role in helping Jamaica achieve development and prosperity. It is a privilege to serve alongside Minister of State, Senator the Honourable Leslie Campbell, and the team at the Ministry, headed by Permanent Secretary Sheila Sealy-Monteith and senior executives who are present here today, and I'm so proud to work with all of them. Some of them are known to you because they've, of course, been serving for very, very many years, and we have represented the acting CTD and the undersecretaries across international organizations, economic affairs, diaspora and consular affairs, policy and corporate affairs, bilateral and hemispheric affairs, as well as trade, all represented here today, demonstrating the scope of our ministry. Mr. President, the Foreign Ministry is made up of a cadre of hard-working, smart-working, and dedicated public servants, right here in Kingston and at our diplomatic and consular missions overseas. I consider myself blessed to work with such a professional team, and together we continue to give of our very best in service to Jamaica, land we love. At the Ministry, we've joined the entire nation to celebrate Jamaica's 60th anniversary of political independence. But we also celebrate that with political independence in 1962 came the responsibility for conducting our own foreign policy. The Ministry of External Affairs was established as one of the very first departments of government to promote to the world the national interests of our fledgling nation. As this statement is being delivered while we commemorate FAFT at 60, I think it is only fitting that I pay homage to the pioneers of the ministry. I want to acknowledge for the record with sincere appreciation all of those who have served before in this ministry at every level, whose work contributed to the high esteem in which the world holds Jamaica. President, we began this year by formalizing for Jamaica the permanent home for her foreign ministry. On the 19th of January, the modern, purpose-built headquarters of the Foreign Ministry, the result of strong bilateral cooperation across administrations, was officially opened and named after the Right Honourable Hugh Lawson Shearer, the longest-serving and one of the most impactful foreign ministers of Jamaica. As many recall him, Mr. President, more for his union presence, I just want to share very quickly for the record that he not only served from 1967 to 1972 and 1980 to 89, but he presented Jamaica's first 7 national policy statements at the United Nations, cementing the stature, and he did so as Senator, Leader of Government Business, and Minister without Portfolio starting in 62. That was the positions he held. Cementing the stature of diplomatic thought of this relatively tiny nation on its entry into the world stage. He was well known within the ACP and within the Commonwealth for solving contentious matters among so many different things. But I must, of course, highlight that he promulgated the idea in our very first national policy statement at the UN, the idea of an International Year of Human Rights, and its celebration in 1968 is noted today as one of his most signal accomplishments. Mr. President, were I to use this State of the Nation in our 60th year to review the full impact of this ministry and indeed the practice of foreign policy on Jamaica and the world, we could quite probably be here for days. And as I know this won't be permitted, I will seek to take a look at some aspects of how we have been ensuring that we maintain an effective and positive global presence that translates into support for the development of Jamaica and the Jamaican people. Said otherwise, more formally, this ministry has been effectively maintaining the alignment of Jamaica's international development support and cooperation with Jamaica's National Development Plan and the strategic objectives of the government, which aim to deliver inclusive and sustainable economic growth and job creation, a secure and just society, and a green environment in which people can live, work, raise families, and do business. We support global initiatives and nurture relationships as good global citizens and in the best interests of Jamaica, and have proceeded with this mandate even as we have grappled with geopolitical tensions, the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and other global realities. Mr. President, if we can look briefly at bilateral affairs. In 1962, 12 countries established diplomatic relations with Jamaica. 3 of them as early as the 2nd of August, and 4 actually on Independence Day itself. This early embrace given to Jamaica by the family of nations then in existence has been marked throughout this year and will further be recognized as we proceed. Today, Jamaica maintains diplomatic relations with 174 countries of the 193 members of the UN. Within my tenure, we have added 9 countries, 1 from Europe and the remainder from Africa and the Pacific, and it is our intention to continue this important process of expansion and inclusion. Then, as now, Mr. President, our bilateral partners have facilitated invaluable assistance for Jamaica in many respects. The conduct of bilateral diplomacy has extended far beyond traditional partners, and the strength of our bilateral relations is evidenced in the significant levels of assistance we continue to receive in the areas of citizen security and justice, energy, disaster management, agriculture, transportation, human capacity building across the spectrum, among many other areas. Furthermore, throughout the period of the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular, the Foreign Ministry spared no effort working closely with the Ministry of Health and Wellness and its agencies in securing vaccines, medical equipment and supplies, which continue today to bolster the public health system. And I remember, just on a personal anecdote, sleeping with my little earphones to make sure that I didn't miss the return call from a foreign minister in a different time zone, because it was so critical to try to ensure that every opportunity was taken. It was quite a challenging time, but again, the foreign ministry really spared no effort. But more particularly, on Cabinet instruction for cohesion and accountability, we established and I chaired an external support coordination committee to manage and coordinate our efforts. Our success is reflected in part in the support received, valued at more than 1.1 billion Jamaican dollars. Thousands of lives have been touched by funds allocated to priority areas, by the equipment, including ventilators, oxygen plants, test machines, kits, PPE, and of course, vaccines and other treatments. We remain grateful to the many bilateral partners, regional and international organizations, to COVAX and the African Medical Supply Platform for their ready assistance. Mr. President, this year Jamaica was particularly honored to have hosted several state and official visits, as well as other bilateral encounters, in keeping with the government's efforts to deepen its strategic engagements and to commemorate our 60th anniversary of independence. Members would recall the visits by their Royal Highnesses Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, now Prince and Princess of Wales, President Kagame of Rwanda, President Sri Ramnath Kovind of India, Foreign Minister Oniyama of Nigeria, and meetings with high-level delegations from Namibia and South Africa. In all instances, important achievements were recorded: MOUs on cooperation in tourism and other areas with Rwanda, India cooperation expansion in respect of technical areas, as well as diplomatic training, many others. And it is our intention to give these encounters even more tangible meaning through implementing and building on the agreements reached. With a similar objective of strengthening bilateral relationships, in March of this year, I was pleased to be a part of the delegation led by Prime Minister the Most Honourable Andrew Holness on his working visit to the United States of America, where he met with Vice President Kamala Harris, and through this and other high-level meetings, including with Secretary of State Blinken, Jamaica secured $52 million United States worth of assistance, particularly in the areas of climate change, security, that is violence reduction in particular, cybersecurity, trade and investment, and energy. In support of bilateral and regional engagements and increased regional trade, I also supported the Prime Minister on his official visit to Trinidad and Tobago in August. Bilateral talks on areas of mutual importance built on talks from Prime Minister Rowley's official visit to Jamaica in 2016, including the conclusion of a trade complaints mechanism between our two countries, which each comprise our largest trading partners within the region. And this mechanism is expected to support private sector confidence and accordingly increase regional trade. Our ongoing efforts within the ministry to further the reach of our diplomatic engagement resulted in more than 65 high-level meetings during the past year alone, more than one-half of which took place within the Commonwealth Secretary-General campaign and will yield positive benefits for some time to come. The government is determined to pursue collaborative approaches and partnerships in regional, hemispheric and global contexts within the United Nations, the EU and the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, within CARIFORUM, Commonwealth, Organization of American States, the Association of Caribbean States, CARICOM and CELAC. These are contexts that we view as critical to development for not only Jamaica, but all developing nations. And as it would be impossible to deal with all, Mr. President, I see you furrowing your brow, I will just briefly address the CARIFORUM context and then CARICOM briefly as well. Mr. President, our active participation within CARIFORUM, which is essentially the CARICOM countries plus the Dominican Republic, it continues as we welcome the new development funding mechanism under our partnership agreement with the European Union, the successor agreement to the Cotonou Partnership Agreement, which expired in 2020. The EU's new Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, we refer to it as the NDC Global Europe, will be the main platform for the EU's development financing for Jamaica and the region. So before, many of you would have heard before about the EDF, the European Development Fund, as a mechanism under which we receive development grant funding. The new instrument will be the NDC, and the allocation for the region has now been confirmed as €800 million. The EU therefore remains our largest provider of grant funding and one of our most important development partners. As one era closes and another one opens, I was pleased to participate in last month's launch of the 3 new EU CARIFORUM development partnerships under the NDC, namely the Green Deal for the Caribbean to address climate change, taking account of vulnerabilities specifically of Caribbean countries as small island developing states, under economic resilience and trade, to build economic resilience, expand investments, production and trade. This is one of the areas under which I know you'll be looking to see what we can draw down. And in respect of governance, security and human development, to build the social cohesion of which Senator Morris spoke earlier and to improve social security. Mr. President, we are pleased that we will be able to participate in broader Pan-American initiatives as well for the first time, such as the Euroclima and the EU-LAC Digital Alliance, the EU Latin American Caribbean Digital Alliance, both of which are aligned with our developmental priorities. We look forward also to continuing to work with the EU and the CARIFORUM Directorate on using these vehicles to move Jamaica further along our path to attaining the sustainable. Mr. President, again, even closer to home, Jamaica continues to play an integral role in CARICOM. During this year, we have made commendable strides to advance areas that required priority attention, including efforts to fulfill and fast-track certain obligations under the CSME regime. The long outstanding review of the Secretariat and other regional institutions, of which Jamaica has been a strong proponent and a participant in securing support, as well as progress in implementing a results-based management system across the region, again on which Jamaica has played a lead role, these continue. Work continues on the implementation of the CSME, and this House would be pleased to note in particular that at the 43rd regular meeting in July, the Conference of Heads agreed on the definitions and qualifications for domestic workers, agricultural workers and private security officers, which were previously approved categories, if you recall, from 2018 when we held the chair of CARICOM. These were previously approved categories of skilled nationals and for which Jamaica had been lobbying for formal adoption in the interest of providing greater opportunities for our people. This decision will require member states, including Jamaica, to amend respective national laws. In this regard, after consultations with the Ministries of Labour and Social Security, Agriculture and Fisheries and National Security, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has included as a new priority item on the legislative agenda for next year the tabling of amendments to the Caribbean Persons Act to give effect to the head's decision. I'm also pleased to inform that since the start of this year, Jamaica has chaired the Council on Security and Law Enforcement, wherein led by Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, we have actively sought to strengthen the region's ability to respond to current transnational security threats. Also regarding chairmanships, last year Jamaica chaired the Council on Trade and Economic Development through me, and next year we will again take the chair of the Council of Foreign Ministers. Mr. President, during the year, as a community, we have engaged several important regional partners, including United States of America, Canada, and the EU, with several concrete initiatives and programs being identified for further collaboration. Next month, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of CARICOM-Cuba diplomatic relations, and during the next year, we will mark the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Caribbean community itself. Activities at the national and regional level are being planned to mark this important milestone. Mr. President, I will now turn to the situation in Haiti. Jamaica remains deeply concerned over the crisis in Haiti, particularly the deteriorating humanitarian and security situation. The strangleholds by gangs on the ports and distribution corridors has led to severe shortages of food and medicinal supplies, compounding the recent resurgence of cholera and the inability of hospitals to function at the required level. Because of insecurity and difficulty in movement, Mr. President, even schools have remained closed for some time, a matter on which Ministers of Education of CARICOM recently met and expressed concern. Mr. President, this crisis continues to deepen even as we recall the unfortunate assassination of late Haitian President Jovenel Moïse and the devastation caused by the earthquakes in 2021, from which they still seek to recover. Mr. President, Jamaica is one of the lead heads in CARICOM on the issue of Haiti. Through CARICOM and bilaterally, we have been in dialogue with the government of Haiti and actively advocating on behalf of Haiti at the multilateral level, as we remain committed to working with other regional, hemispheric and international partners to promote a Haitian-led solution. We support the Haitian government's belief that the collective support of the international community is needed to strengthen critical institutional capacities and the governance framework in order to regain stability and to ensure the platform of security needed to embed medium to long-term sustainable solutions in their country. The United Nations Security Council Resolution 2653, which was unanimously adopted on the 21st of October, is a welcome step as sanctions have now been placed on a notorious gang leader whose reported acts have threatened Haiti's peace, stability and security. We believe, however, that the resolution did not go far enough, and the international community needs to do more in the best interests of the Haitian people. We state unequivocally that, as requested by Haiti, Jamaica is prepared to play our part together with CARICOM and willing members of the international community towards a solution to the humanitarian, security and institutional crises in Haiti. We therefore continue to engage towards this end. Mr. President, on multilateral affairs, I note that on the 8th of September 1962, Jamaica was accepted for membership of the United Nations, and on the 21st of that same month, the black, green and gold of the newly minted Jamaican flag was hoisted at the United Nations headquarters. It was a pleasure to commemorate this event just a few weeks ago hoisting both the UN and Jamaican flags right here in downtown Kingston, together with Dr. Conneal and the UN team, the diplomatic corps, and heads of other partner bodies. We took the opportunity to acknowledge that Jamaica has a record of achievements within the UN system, of which we can be truly proud, as well as the necessity of the United Nations to the world today, especially for small states such as ours. In a period of global uncertainty and in the face of increasing threats to multilateralism, Jamaica's belief in and support for the multilateral system remains strong and vibrant, and our positions on issues of international concern remain consistent with the principles that have long served us as well. Recognizing the implications of growing insecurity internationally, Jamaica this year sought to strengthen its presence and expand its sphere of influence in those multilateral organizations which are deemed to be of strategic importance. Our campaign for leadership at the Commonwealth Secretariat was a part of this, and even though we ultimately did not win the election, we will certainly derive benefits from the relationships re-energized or started during the process. Membership of UN bodies is another way through which Jamaica has sought to maintain an active role and visible profile in international affairs. Over the last 60 years, Jamaica has had the opportunity to offer invaluable service on a number of United Nations organizations and subsidiary bodies. Since I became minister, we have had successful elections to UNESCO, ITLOS, ECOSOC, the CRPD, on which Senator Morris sits, the CERD, on which Professor Shepherd is now chair, the IMO twice. We have been re-elected since under the same tenure, and just last month to the Executive Council of the International Civil Aviation Authority. And I really want to just pay tribute to the amazing team that we have at the ministry that manages the candidature process, that manages the bilateral process that needs to underpin it, and that manages all of the technical elements that require the working across agencies, the working across ministries, and the working across governments to secure and confirm these elections. I know Senator Morris has experienced it personally. He has been at the table with them even through COVID, where virtual engagements were used. But I know that he has testified to their capacity and their incredible drive and passion. And I know he joins me in expressing appreciation to the team members in that regard. Mr. President, as the United Nations is at the very center of multilateralism, this year's General Assembly carried special significance. Jamaica's policy statement in the general debate, delivered by Prime Minister Holness, advocated for and sought to raise a profile of issues of concern, including on the matter of trade in small arms and light weapons. Jamaica's further proposal for the official designation of February 17th annually as the Global Tourism Resilience Day is emblematic as we emerge from the pandemic of the evolution of matters which occupy Jamaica's developmental interests. It's also demonstrative of the vision and courage which we continue to display in the conduct of global affairs, as was done in 1962 when Jamaica's Hugh Shearer proposed the observance of the International Year of Human Rights, which I spoke to earlier. An area, Mr. President, of current and critical interest, which I just wish to note, is that of cybersecurity. I just want to note that Jamaica is coordinating CARICOM's position within the UN systems on the UN treaty negotiation process to elaborate an international instrument on countering the use of information and communication technologies for criminal purposes. Locally, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade plays a critical role in the interministerial approach taken to the subject, the Council being chaired by both the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology and the Ministry of National Security. Mr. President, as the host of the International Seabed Authority, Jamaica welcomed this year's staging of the sessions of the Council and the Assembly, which coincided with the 40th anniversary of the signing of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in Montego Bay, the Montego Bay Convention, or the Constitution of the Oceans that we celebrate today, and this year, and Jamaica continues to demonstrate its global leadership in protecting and sustainably using our oceans and marine resources. The issue of the development of a regulatory regime for deep seabed mining has come under increased scrutiny from both domestic and international civil society organizations and NGOs. In the interest of ensuring that deep seabed activities benefit developing countries, and particularly small island developing states, Jamaica has remained vigilant in the discussions on this matter. We are committed to striking an appropriate balance between ensuring responsible activities in the area, and I just wish to note that I know sometimes when the public discusses this matter, they don't recognize that the area is not an area around Jamaica. The area is beyond national jurisdictions. It is in areas which are far beyond any country's borders or economic EEZs. So we are seeking to ensure that there will be responsible conduct in activities in the area while protecting and preserving the marine environment and deep sea ecosystems. So we will seek to build public awareness on deep seabed mining, providing facts and education in order to dispel misunderstandings. And this is work that will lie ahead of us, Mr. President. Finish?
Mr. President. I should have given the privilege to Senator Brown, who would have been more fulsome. But, Mr. President, the Senator's time for speaking having expired, I would ask that the Senate extend her time for speaking sufficient to complete her presentation.
Thank you very much, Senator Bond. Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Minister.
Thank you, Senator. On the matter of consular affairs, Mr. President, and I don't know if anybody has a sense of, I certainly, as I go through these things, I always am struck at the breadth of the work of this ministry, and I know my team is feeling like, yes, we are here. But we move to consular affairs, derived from the Vienna Convention.
Recognize that you have been given sufficient time to complete, so you don't
but don't abuse.
You don't have to, no, you don't have to rush. Take your time.
I hear Senator Bunting's laugh sounds a little forced, though, Mr. President. Derived from the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, to which Jamaica subscribes, attention to the needs and interests of our nationals has been, from inception, a priority mandate of the Foreign Ministry. The practice of consular diplomacy has, however, evolved and emerged as an extremely complex area and has had to become even more of a focal point of the Ministry's work. Assistance provided by the Ministry to nationals at home and abroad includes the facilitation of passport and citizenship documents, visa requests, welfare assistance for Jamaicans in distress, authentication of documents, the provision of no objection letters for Jamaicans who secure employment overseas, directing maintenance orders to authorities overseas, and even the facilitation of remote testimony for both the public and private bars at the chanceries of overseas missions. So there has been, not only has the scope expanded, but the number of requests in these and other areas has also grown exponentially as the diaspora's presence and the travel of our nationals has expanded, highlighting the need for our offices to operate in non-traditional activities. I'm extremely proud that, as promised, we have developed and completed a consular manual to support and clarify services and service delivery at our missions and across the consular network, as well as to manage the expectations and to facilitate nationals overseas. We've also expanded the consular network significantly so that we now have 95 honorary consuls in place. And we have actually also ensured that some who have sort of not only passed retirement, but been in the nonagenary realm, that they have handed over to consuls who have been better able to deliver some of the services required of them. So we have strengthened the consular network to support the work of standard diplomatic and consular missions. And I think something that people also, maybe the public of Jamaica may wish to recognize, is that these honorary consul positions are not paid positions, they are voluntary, so they're very important to our ability to expand without expanding the cost to the taxpayers of Jamaica, to expand our reach. And finding the right people, but also finding persons who are willing to take on the sheer breadth of the work on a voluntary basis is always quite challenging. And the fact that Jamaica, little Jamaica, is able to have 95 of these persons in place is testament to how highly we are viewed, how well we are viewed, the esteem in which we are held, because people want to fly the flag of Jamaica. So this is something, this is service for which we are always grateful, and on which we rely heavily where we don't have diplomatic missions. Mr. President, while the increase in demand for services was noticeable prior to the onset of the pandemic, the fact is that the last 2 years were extraordinarily challenging, witnessing an escalation on almost all fronts. During the pandemic, in addition to the ministry's support for the securing of medical equipment and PPE and vaccines, our support was also required for the repatriation of more than 3,050 seafarers, 750 crew and cruise passengers, as well as the repatriation of approximately 1,050 Jamaican nationals outside of the cruise and seafaring industry through cooperation with our diplomatic and consular missions. Mr. President, no, that requires applause, by the way. Sorry. I have to bring it to your attention. 3,005. And I want to note that despite the narrative that has been built around one particular difficult situation, and hear people making blithe throwaway statements about how we don't care and we leave people at sea, I want to remind that the government acted swiftly and decisively to assist persons who are stranded on ships with no open ports of entry. The 3,050 persons who were returned from scores of ships across more than 10 shipping lines in different seas and oceans across the world, in circumstances which held the ship owners and operators to their obligations under the relevant international conventions, ensuring that and safety of the seafarers were respected while managing the cost to Jamaican taxpayers as best as possible, and ensuring that they were brought home with due consideration to Jamaica's safety, including the safety of their families and our healthcare workers who were under intensive strain at this time. That is the true story of what was done. Importantly, and perhaps less well known, and something which is really quite respected within the international maritime community, is the fact that the government instituted measures to facilitate transit through Jamaica of other nationals for necessary crew changes, and created international leadership by becoming one of the only, if not the only in this region, to facilitate that type of transit during such a difficult time, with the support of the JDF, ensuring the continuity of critical aspects of the shipping industry globally. Jamaica, once again, led, was not only caring, but strategic and deliberate in its actions. Mr. President, perhaps at a different level, From time to time, the ministry has facilitated the repatriation of scores of fishermen rescued at sea or who found themselves in situations of distress in other countries in the region. Attending to the urgent needs of Jamaican fishermen in distress situations overseas has been one of our major consular activities over the last several years in particular. In this regard, there have been several different cases involving Jamaicans rescued at sea. You'll recall, Mr. President, the 28 fishermen that exploded off the coast of Colombia, and they were rescued by the Colombian National Guard. And there have been others who have been detained for fishing illegally, and others held in other criminal activities and in need of assistance, including repatriation from countries such as Colombia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Close to 150 nationals have been repatriated in these circumstances in recent years. Mr. President, assistance provided by the ministry under the lines, never reaching the headlines, and a part of the very, very difficult and emotionally draining aspects of the work, ranges from providing medical attention, providing emergency accommodation, contacting family members to inform of whereabouts, sometimes in circumstances where there may be even uncertainty of the desire to have such communication made, and that even that process can be difficult as well. Providing travel documents, providing identification processes, and ultimately repatriation. Mr. President, there is now an active case involving 34 Jamaicans located in San Andres, Colombia, who were believed to be fishing illegally. There are 8 other persons on the vessels who are non-nationals of Jamaica, but who are claiming relationships to persons in Jamaica who are also on the same vessel. We are, without saying too much at this point in time, I will just say that we have engaged with the owner of the vessels, and we are working with our embassy and our Colombian partners to process the crew for repatriation to Jamaica, as well as, of course, working with the, well, let me not say too much in that regard. I'll leave it at that and say that we are hopeful of a positive result. But I want to take this opportunity to bring to attention the need for boat owners, for boat operators, for fishermen and women alike, to recognize that times have changed and countries have changed their laws. Illegal fishing is a major international issue. Vessels are seized. That's part of a judicial process. Crew is liable to be imprisoned. Again, a judicial process. They are not political processes in which governments can engage and on friendship. If a decision is taken to commence that process, it becomes very difficult. I want to call on our boat owners and operators and the captains of these vessels to fish responsibly in our waters. I also want to impress on boat owners the importance of insurance, not only for damage, but for loss and seizure, and more importantly, for the care and protection of their crew. It is not responsible to send people's children out on the high seas without consideration of the risk and the protection needed, and to simply, when they fall on distress, say, well, the government must. You have a responsibility as well, and I want to call on them to be more thoughtful in this regard. From the government's perspective, we will be working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries to establish a policy on treating these matters, because although we hope they will not continue to multiply, we do believe that we're in circumstances where we can no longer treat them in an ad hoc manner. We need a full policy, cross-government policy to treat with such matters going forward. Mr. President, in a more general recognition that the world continues to see an increasing number of emergency situations, worsening natural disasters, global pandemics, episodes of civil unrest, acts of terrorism, and human trafficking, and understanding the increased vulnerability, therefore, of Jamaicans overseas, and understanding and having seen the most complex strain on long-existing systems through the pandemic, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade will be introducing an online portal for the registration of nationals who are traveling overseas for short-term stays to provide information that will strengthen our capacity for effective response. Mr. President, when I had recognized that in order for Jamaicans overseas to register, they had to come into the nearest mission in order to write up a form, we tried to make an adjustment, and during the pandemic, a form was actually put up on the website. But we have recognized that this is absolutely not sufficient. Where during the pandemic, the ministry had Excel sheets changing on a consistent basis from all over the world to try to ensure where people were and how we could best ensure that they could comply with the processes needed to bring them home, to locate families, to find support, to situate them within communities. It was an extremely difficult process. An online portal which provides one single database that allows persons' data to also be removed when they set the date of their return is a way in which we can ensure that if there is this type of event once more, we will be able to, and even smaller events, more controlled events, and are controlled and are contacted by family, we will be in a better state to be able to reach out to our people. So I'm very pleased to indicate that work on the portal is at an advanced stage with the developer and with the team at the ministry, and I expect to announce its launch shortly. Mr. President, in this same vein, but no, I put no applause for the portal. Guys, sorry, I feel like it's so important. In this same vein, no, I'm not begging anybody over there. I'm just encouraging my colleagues. No, I'm encouraging my colleagues to stay focused to do what it is I know they had in their hearts. But Mr. President, in this same vein, Mr. President, attention and resources have been directed to assisting students abroad. Last year, the ministry coordinated a shipment of basic food and essential items for students in Cuba, again in very anxious circumstances which create difficult public issues to manage publicly, but again, provide a great deal of detailed work which is just unseen to the public eye. And it's very difficult for staff. I know sometimes people think they're just giving me a hard time, but they really make it difficult for staff who are executing some of the very minute details that are necessary to have these things work.
Cuba Center, bro. You can stop now.
But I want to take the opportunity for that particular tranche of assistance to thank our private sector partners, including Grace Kennedy. See Don sitting a little higher in his chair. And Seprod, who both provided great donations of things which are within their normal production line and which were very, very important and well used by the students overseas. I want to also thank the students and the parents who helped in the process, and the staff of the ministry who worked very hard to package and distribute these items, including our former ambassador to Cuba, Catherine Phipps, who was critical on the distribution side. There still were a lot of very heavy restrictions on movement, which made it very difficult to retain transportation and expensive to retain transportation to distribute in different regions. And the students were all across Cuba. And again, some of these challenges are not always recognized or known. In March of this year, our effort to repatriate students who had to flee Ukraine following Russia's invasion was also ultimately successfully executed under very difficult circumstances as we welcome home 20 students on Ash Wednesday. Through a special allocation approved by the Ministry of Finance, in addition to a contribution made by the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the government absorbed the cost of air travel and other incidentals associated with the repatriation exercise. Our outreach continues as we now actively are facilitating interventions to obtain their transcripts and other vital documents from their universities in Ukraine. We also authenticated their documents free of cost to replace those which were left behind due to hasty exit, and we've also coordinated efforts with the Registrar General's Department and PICA to assist the students in replacing others, again free of cost. I also met with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, His Excellency Dmytro Kuleba, in the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, where I was able to not only thank him for his ministry's facilitation during that very difficult time, but to also raise some of the technical issues which we're still having with some of the educational institutions. So we continue to work on behalf of the students who have not yet had the results in respect of their documents. So I say this by way of update on what was a matter of great public concern. Mr. President, still connected to supporting citizens directly, I want to just touch briefly on the introduction of the apostilles in July 2021 to our authentication portfolio process. I am pleased to report that there has been a steady demand of this for this service, which is accepted in close to 120 countries across the world. The ministry, since we started in July, has issued more than 5,000 apostilles to date. Nationals are now enjoying a simplified and cost-effective authentication process, and we're now able, and this, I know there may be people who are listening who care very much about this, we are now able to offer the expedited service for eligible documents. Now, my team will ask me to clarify what are eligible documents. So if your document still requires verification by the Ministry of Education or by the Ministry of Justice, if your document has been signed by a person who is not on our recognized register and therefore has to be checked before it comes back, we cannot turn that around in 24 hours. That will not be an eligible document. But where you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed and no further verification is, you will be eligible for this expedited process. So I am very much pleased that we're able to. Pardon me? No, it's a process that happens. The updating of the register, it happens organically as things come in, they are updated. Members, I just remind that the application form, the costs, and the process are all located on our website at mfaft.gov.jm. You don't need to email me to ask about the apostille process. It is on the website. So access to everyone in our inclusive approach to these matters. Mr. President, I'm going to touch very briefly on the fact that our bilateral, multilateral, and consular diplomacy agenda are accompanied in our strategic plan with diaspora diplomacy. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade remains actively engaged with Jamaicans overseas as part of the involvement of the diaspora in national development. And this is an area, of course, near and dear to my heart, as engagement is I believe, one of the most personal areas in foreign affairs. But I will not address it today. Instead, I will use the opportunity to signal that Minister Campbell, Senator the Honourable Leslie Campbell, will provide a ministerial statement addressing the area of that portfolio, including on the diaspora policy and its tabling. I want to thank Minister Campbell, for taking the policy baton on this matter, to taking us to this last stage of adoption. And although some of the work will have been done before his assumption of the portfolio, his command of the area will undoubtedly provide for a scintillating and expansive ministerial statement on diaspora affairs. And expansive. Mr. President, the final area of the ministry's work which I wish to highlight, just a few aspects, it's difficult to go beyond, is foreign trade. Minister Hill has already spoken very well of the importance of international trade to a small open economy such as ours. And he spoke specifically to the need to increase Jamaica's exports, addressing the supply side and the investment side of the equation. My ministry continues to successfully promote Jamaica's interests in trade negotiations and through trade policy development. So for the last couple of years, Mr. President, I had served as ministerial coordinator of the group of African and Caribbean and Pacific states within the WTO, and it has been a truly critical period. With 79 member states, the OACPS is the second largest international organization, and it requires a great deal of delicacy and steadfastness to navigate and build cohesion. I therefore really want to thank and congratulate and celebrate Ambassador Cheryl Spencer and the mission team in Geneva, who have been phenomenal during this period and are well respected in the WTO, following on the equally well respected Ambassador McCook, who preceded her at mission, and who supported me as facilitator in the fisheries negotiations at the WTO in 2017. Mr. President, members may recall that in the public domain, over the last several years in particular, the WTO had come under severe criticism, among other things, failing to arrive at decisions. And this was rolled into a general criticism of the multilateral system as failing to deliver. So heading into MC12 in June of this year, delegates were also very wary of a lack of progress on WTO reform and WTO issues generally. Being fully aware of these challenges, I was, however, honored to be asked by Director General Okonjo-Iweala to facilitate the negotiations on WTO reform, and I am extremely proud that we reached agreement on the outcome. I was also further gratified that we played a part after many preparatory meetings and many intensive discussions and consultations during this MC12, in coming to a successful conclusion with agreement on elements of long-standing negotiation on fisheries subsidies, food security, and other matters, coming to a package of outcomes which has been celebrated within the international trade community. The work continues in building on these outcomes. Closer to home again, Jamaica also continues to advocate within CARICOM's Council for Trade and Economic Development for the most favorable treatment to be accorded to goods relevant to our country's industries and trade. As you may recall, this process was used to establish Jamaica to be the regional supplier of condensed milk, which was just secured this year. And we encourage members, yes, that's major. And we continue to encourage members of the private sector to encourage the regional opportunities which exist and to use the quoted process to support their expansion of exports within the region. Mr. President, I want to welcome the outreach spearheaded by Minister Hill of a trade delegation to Guyana, which explored avenues for economic trade cooperation and investment. These and other expected outreaches are expected to deepen Jamaica's trade with CARICOM partners, and I congratulate him again on his foresight in this action. Mr. President, undoubtedly, action on this front will support the long-standing preferential trading relations which we enjoy with Canada and the United States, as well as through the economic partnership agreements with the EU and the United Kingdom. I wish to just highlight that the former is undergoing its second review, and the latter, in respect of which we are working on institution building. Mr. President, as I close, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade has been actively working to fulfill its purpose and vision, following a well-established tradition of excellence. The work undertaken over the past year also complements our work in many other fields not actively mentioned today. In financing for development, where we continue to advocate for a reform of the international financial architecture to be aligned with our development goals, and in particular with the SDGs. We deal with the situation of middle-income countries, and in particular highly indebted middle-income countries, and graduation and how it impacts us. Human rights, disarmament, small arms, human trafficking, gender empowerment, the persons living with disabilities, peace and security. We have co-led major initiatives within the United Nations to great results, which have been mainstreamed within the multilateral agenda with little fanfare, and I will have to find opportunities to share some of these in more details. But, Mr. President, I am proud of the contribution my team and I at the Ministry have made to Jamaica's national development and continue to make. Proud of the work undertaken, mostly behind the scenes and with little thanks, to protect and promote Jamaica's image overseas and to support the work of other ministries, departments and agencies. I am extremely proud of the Ministry's hard work to deepen our engagement and collaboration with all our partners in support of our national development goals and indeed our 2030 development agenda. And as always, government continues to build on Jamaica's solid, principle-based foundation and to address current, cascading and interlocking challenges in a pragmatic way. Mr. President, as Minister and leader of government business, I have come across many knotty issues and a few trying moments. But I am convinced that perseverance builds character, and character always begets hope. And so I say, as long as I am able, with the love and loyalty of my heart, the wisdom and courage of my mind, the strength and vigor of my body, I will play my part to ensure that Jamaica increases in fellowship and grace and plays her part in improving the welfare of the whole human race.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Mr. President, I believe this is the point in time when we will ask for recommittal of notices of motion taken orally.
I just ask you to acknowledge the staff of the... The question is that the agenda item, notices of motions given orally, be recommitted. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate.
Minister, I think you were asking me to suspend the debate for a date to be fixed.
Mr. President, with your leave, could the debate of the State of the Nation debate be suspended for a date to be fixed.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Okay. Minister, you can continue now. Minister Samuda.
Thank you, Mr. President, and apologies for earlier confusion. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at a meeting of the House, at the next meeting of the Senate rather, I will move the following motion. Whereas Section 19 of the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act 2022 provides that the Minister may, by order subject to affirmative resolution, declare a firearms amnesty if the Minister is satisfied that A, the amnesty may result in the reduction in the number of illegally possessed firearms or ammunition in Jamaica, and B, it is in the public interest to declare the amnesty. And whereas on the first day of November 2022, the Minister made the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Firearms Amnesty, October 2022, now therefore be resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Firearms Amnesty Order 2022 Resolution. 2. The Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Firearms Amnesty Order is hereby affirmed.
Ms. Curtis.
Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you, Minister. So you will do that at public business, which is now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the matter for consideration, Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members should have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Continue, Minister, please.
Mr. President, the matter for consideration before this Honourable Senate this afternoon is the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Firearms Amnesty Order 2022 and Resolution. Pursuant to the powers conferred on the Minister by Section 19 of the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act 2022, the Minister may declare a firearms amnesty if satisfied that A, the amnesty may result in the reduction in the number of illegally possessed firearms and ammunition in Jamaica. And Mr. President, the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act was gazetted on October 13, 2022, and by way of order dated November 1, 2022, the Act is now in force, and save for Part 7, all sections of the Act are in operation. In this regard, the penalty regime associated with prohibited firearms, that is, those for which no firearm authorization has been granted, is in full effect. This Honourable Senate will recall that the penalty for breach of offences under part of the Act dealing with prohibited regime are particularly punitive, ranging from mandatory term of imprisonment of 15 years to life imprisonment. When we had conducted the debate in the Firearms Bill in September, the intention was signalled to declare a firearms amnesty as soon as the Act was brought into operation. This amnesty would allow persons who may be in possession of illegal firearms or ammunition, or those for which no license or authorization exists, the opportunity to surrender these firearms or ammunition to the state without fear of prosecution. Mr. President, under the amnesty pursuant to this order, any person who voluntarily surrenders or discloses the location of any firearm or ammunition during the amnesty period shall not be charged with any offence relating to illegal possession, custody, or control of that firearm or ammunition. Mr. President, the amnesty will run for 14 days and is slated to commence on the 5th day of November 2022 and will end at midnight on the 19th of November 2022. This means, Mr. President, that once the amnesty expires, we can expect the full force of the law to be applied to anyone found in possession of illegal firearms or ammunition. Mr. President, firearm amnesties such as the one subject of this order are not unique to Jamaica. because they have been used successfully around the world as an operational tool to reduce the high levels of armed violence resulting in the proliferation of firearms and ammunition. For the last 25 years, Mr. President, Jamaica has recorded on average 1,270 murders annually, the vast majority being committed with illegal firearms. The firearm is the weapon of choice for murders and other acts of crime and armed violence in Jamaica. The proliferation of illegal firearms continues to hinder national growth and advancement and has become the biggest threat to citizens' peace and security. The security forces have maintained a steady rate of firearm seizures over the years. Since 2018, the security forces have taken more than 3,200 illegal firearms from the streets and in excess of 53,000 rounds of ammunition. Each year, they have seized upwards of 625 firearms. In fact, as at October 31st, 2022, a total of 652 firearms have been seized. This represents an increase of 11% over the 585 recorded for a similar period in 2021. Mr. President, I want to emphasize that the aim of this measure is not to reveal the identities of persons who comply with the amnesty. The amnesty is also intended to provide an opportunity for license holders who are in possession of expired authorizations to surrender their weapons to the authority. The conditions for the surrender of firearms or ammunition are outlined in the order. Firearms or ammunition may be surrendered to any sub-officer or senior sub-officer on duty at any police station, any designated officer at any FLA location, or to an attorney at law on behalf of an individual seeking the amnesty for the attorney to deliver the firearm or ammunition to the nearest police station. Mr. President, in the lower house, the Deputy Prime Minister urged persons possessing illegal firearms or ammunition to make full use of the amnesty, because when it expires on November 19th, those who refuse to surrender their firearms and ammunition, once convicted, will face the stiff penalties of which we are aware. I would expect that colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join in encouraging those who are in possession of illegal firearms to indeed take advantage of this amnesty. Mr. President, we know this matter is particularly serious. I invite colleagues to offer contribution on the order before us. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister Samuda. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as the Minister said, the order is based on the Minister of National Security being satisfied that the amnesty may result in the reduction in the number of illegally possessed firearms or ammunition in Jamaica. And I am hopeful that it will result in, many illegally possessed firearms and as much ammunition as possible. However, I don't think that is the only outcome that justifies this amnesty. I do think, since the Firearms Act has been overhauled substantially, and many things have changed, not just for persons with illegal firearms, but also those persons who have authorizations or who have had authorizations in the past from the FLA, be given an opportunity to make things right, so to speak. Particularly, we had during the COVID period, many persons did not re-register their firearms for one reason or another. And while the...
Sorry, Senator Bunting, renew. You mean renew?
Renew.
You said re-register.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, renew.
You know, and there was, I believe, reasonable latitude provided, not just during COVID, but even before that, for persons to come in after their birthday. In fact, there was generally thought to be a sort of month discretion or something to that. I don't know if it was in law or just in operation. But as we know, and as we would recall during the Joint Select Committee, we spent some time on the fact that that month was now a period before the birthday. So if somebody, for example, forgot or were negligent in getting it renewed, their license renewed, then they're actually subject to fairly serious penalties under the new Firearms Act 2022. In particular, if we go to Section 71, that deals with renewal of authorizations. In fact, sorry, 73, which deals with the obligations of the holder of firearm and ammunition. And they are under 73.2. It says the firearm shall be submitted under subsection 1 within the period of 30 days immediately preceding each birthday of the license holder. And if that is not done, then they are subject to, on summary conviction before a parish court, a fine not exceeding $3 million or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years. So I think it is reasonable to allow for a period for anybody who may have been lax in doing that, but had a licensed firearm or a proper authorization, but was tardy for whatever reason, to be given an opportunity to put their registration in order. And I would encourage, Mr. President, that the FLA, since this is the amnesty is for a fairly short period, comes into effect on the 5th to the 19th, 2 weeks, that the FLA should be doing some active public education, reaching out to persons, hopefully to get them to comply, to use the opportunity, the short window of the amnesty, to comply, to put their registrations in order, their firearm registrations in order, and their licenses, so that they will not be subject to, to a fine of up to $3 million. And we don't want to criminalize persons whose behavior is tardy but not really a threat to society. The minister who is piloting the order through the resolution through the Senate mentioned in aggregate some figures, but I want to look specifically at 2022. Based on the last JCF periodic serious and violent crimes review, up to year to date to October 29th, we've had 1,294 murders, about an 8% increase relative to the same period last year. We've had a number of that figure, 1,096, we had guns were used as the implement in murder. And in terms of ammunition, guns and ammunition stolen, again, if you look at the ratio of firearms stolen, 60 year to date, and ammunition just under 2,000 rounds year to date, you will see that most of the firearms recovered would not have come from licensed firearms being stolen, because there were 600, more than 10 times the numbers of firearms recovered, and about 5 or 6 times the ammunition recovered were stolen from legitimate sources. So the illegal firearm trade is the main source of the guns, the illegal guns on the street. So the final thing I'd point out final 1 or 2 things I'd point out from the statistics is that formerly quiet parishes like Manchester, we're seeing an 85% increase in murders this year relative to the same period last year. St. Elizabeth, 68% increase. These are parishes that traditionally had relatively small numbers. You want an absolute number for Manchester? It was 26 year-to-date in 21, is 48 this year-to-date this year. I can tell you, for the people of Manchester, 48 is a very disturbing number for the first 10 months of the year. That's going more than a murder a week, which traditionally has not been the pace at which we have murders there. But the final thing that disturbs me about the statistics is that the JCF has once again reduced the information in this weekly publication. The numbers of murders, for example, or the numbers of shootings or the numbers of rapes in absolute terms is one thing, but it was also useful to look at the clear-up rate. The clear-up rate says for these offenses, what percentage of them the perpetrator has been arrested or killed in a fatal shooting, the suspect has been killed in a fatal shooting by police in a confrontation with police or with other gangs. That figure has been provided routinely every week, certainly up to at least September this year, for the last more than a decade, at least 15 years. Again, suddenly it is now missing from the serious and violent crimes review without any explanation. Even a user like myself, as the opposition spokesman on national security, no explanation has been given why they've stopped giving the clear-up rate for murder, shooting, all serious and violent crimes. And this gives us a measure of what's likely to happen in future. Because the higher the clear-up rate means that you're taking the violence producers off the streets, one way or the other. And that is an indication of what we can anticipate down the road. Are we making a headway? If we're clearing up in excess of 50%, if we're clearing up 60 or 70%, it means we're reducing a lot of the serial violence producers. We're taking them off of the street. But we are now left to speculate as to why, again, the information is not being shared with the public and legitimate stakeholders so that the performance of the JCF in this area can be assessed. I am recommending that it be reinstated, and so that public, analysts, academics can be better informed and better able to judge the performance, not just of the JCF, but also of the government. Now, earlier this week, Minister Chang made a public statement or made a statement saying that the public should expect an increase in police fatal shootings. I thought that was unfortunate. We have been seeing an increase in police fatal shootings over the last 2 or 3 years, and it really goes against a positive trend that we've seen since 2012 or 2013. Minister says that as the police improve their capacity and intelligence gathering, they'll end up in more confrontations with criminals. But, Mr. President, I would disagree. On the contrary, the better intelligence and the better operational planning would result in less fatalities from these operations. In fact, this is a point that INDICOM has made consistently over the years. Good operational planning results in reduced fatalities, whether of criminals, of the police themselves, or even innocent bystanders. So I would caution the minister. I know he's under pressure. I know Minister Bartlett is praying for him. I understand more than most the pressure that he's under. But he has to be very careful and be very responsible in making statements that could be misinterpreted as some sort of open season for extrajudicial killings.
1 minute, please, Senator Bunting. Minister?
120.
Mr. President, the time being 1:18.
120 somewhere.
Time being 1:18. Might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Members would have heard the question. In favor? Thank you, Minister Bunting. Thank you, Ms. Senator Bunting.
Even since the publication of these statistics, Mr. President, we've had some very alarming news this week. In Clarendon, in particular, I think they had about a dozen murders within 10 in 12 hours. 10 in 12 hours. And I think 2 days back to back, we had 10 murders at least per day this week. We also saw a story about gang warfare originating in St. James, creating mayhem in Lauderhill, Florida. And I use this to point to what seems to be an increasing trend, Minister Samuda, where there are gangsters based overseas, whether temporarily or for extended periods, who seem to be pulling the strings of the shooters in Jamaica. And it has existed for many years. But this year, it seems to be on a substantial increase. More and more of the murders that you hear taking place in Jamaica, and now we're seeing the reciprocal in Florida, are based on gangs which are operating transnationally, but also settling local scores overseas and vice versa. And it is a disturbing trend. But specifically to the order, Mr. President, we see that a number of stakeholder groups are complaining that they have not been properly briefed. If you again come back to the point, the Bar Association, I think, have made that point. Even the police, I believe, are just to be briefed today. But this is one of the recommendations that was made by the leader of the opposition in his presentation on the resolution in the House. He said that ministry needs to ensure that there is extensive legal training flowing not just from the amnesty, but indeed from all the new elements of the Firearms Act. Extensive legal training for the JCF, the prosecutors, the judiciary, to ensure that they understand the whole range of new provisions. Many of the traditional offenses which they have become accustomed to no longer exist under the new legislation. And we're also specifically concerned about the absence of an accountability structure within the parameters of the order itself, as it makes no mention of keeping a record of the surrendered firearms. The order puts an obligation on the attorneys. The attorneys have to carefully record everything, but it makes no mention of a similar obligation for the scores of police stations across Jamaica which could be receiving these illegal weapons that would be surrendered. And we think it would be a safeguard, especially in a society where in the past we've had many allegations and some beyond allegations, some proof where firearms were planted at crime scenes by members of the security forces. So we don't want a number of firearms to be surrendered to some remote outstations and there is no proper accounting for it. So we believe that it would be useful, it would be important that some sort of supplementary order be done to govern the operation of surrendering weapons to these many police stations across the island, so that there is a proper record and accountability system. The attorneys who surrender weapons on behalf of another person, they're required to keep records of the surrender under paragraph 2.5 of the order. However, no such requirement is made for any person, for any other person under paragraph 2.1. This is an inconsistency which the minister should consider addressing. Mr. President, the opposition is in support of all efforts to tackle the issue of crime in Jamaica, so long as the methods employed are within the ambit of our laws and Constitution. We continue to support all the good police officers in Jamaica who put their lives in danger, and indeed all members of the security forces, and I would expand it here to include the correctional officers. They have the full support of the opposition and indeed the population, so long as they operate within the ethical and professional standards of their office. In closing, I would say there's one concern while we're doing these administrative things. My understanding is that the 6 billion or so capital budget, and I'm going from my recollection, for the 22-23 budget year, and we're now almost halfway through the third quarter of the financial year. But I understand only about 17% of that capital budget has been expended to date in the Ministry of National Security. Now, at a time when the society is under such pressure and the police are under such pressure to respond, I think to be, halfway through the third quarter of the fiscal year, while only expending about a sixth of the budget, suggests that we're behind. Something needs to be done there to ensure that another year we're not sending back tons of money from the Ministry of National Security to the Ministry of Finance, when the need on the ground, in the communities, in the divisions, are so great. And so maybe this is why I'm hearing rumors, Mr. President, that there may be an appointment of a retired senior army officer shortly taking up a senior administrative role at the ministry. But we will soon know whether it's rumor or whether it is news. With those few words, Mr. President, may it please you.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a brief contribution to make, but I thought it was very relevant for me to speak on this very significant effort by the administration, by the Prime Minister and by the Minister of National Security in this effort to address gun violence in Jamaica. I think that each and every one of us in here have expressed in one way or the other the concerns around gun violence and illegal guns in our country. And I could not make it pass as the effort to move away from the more drastic, draconian, and punitive approach that we are all ingrained in is being delayed, so to speak, to allow for an opportunity for members of the public to surrender willingly these weapons of destruction to our people and our country. And, you know, in the recognition that it is unfortunate that we see sometimes discipline in our country as being something negative. And discipline is a positive thing. We are sometimes raised to recognize that, boy, somebody trying to steer you the right way, it seems like it's something negative. But I just want to emphasize that it is a positive thing, and we must seek to recognize this and promote this. I just wanted to bring attention to also, we need to step away from the informer culture. I encourage especially the women folk who might be aware of persons who have illegal guns. I speak to the mothers, the sisters, the girlfriends, the side chicks, everybody who knows that there are persons who are harboring these instruments. Encourage them to go and turn these weapons in. Save some lives. Our school children, we are seeing growing concern about this type of violence within our schools. And I encourage us to also bring some attention to that population. Just to bring 2 points of focus in the order sheet here, Mr. President. Any police station, the amnesty starts from tomorrow, the 5th of November, to the 19th of November, 2 Saturdays from now. And it says any police station to the sub-officer in charge or the senior sub-officer on duty. I also want to bring to our attention on the last sheet of the order paper that you can call ahead to facilitate this surrender. You can call 811. You can call 876-838-3084 or 876-968-9533. I bring attention to these numbers, Mr. President, as I encourage, and I think all of us in this chamber encourage Jamaicans to take advantage of this opportunity to turn over these weapons, to try and start a new phase in your own lives as we seek to bring a new phase for Jamaica. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Longmore, for that very timely intervention. Minister? Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Brown?
Thank you, President. President, last week in my State of the Nation address, I called attention to the firearm legislation. I asked about the amnesty. I indicated that the government had announced 18 months ago the new bill, and that the new bill was to have taken effect by March of 2021. I quoted from the pledge like the minister did today, so we are at 1 and some things. And I wish you had given the chance to extend her time for the over hour that she spoke. Mr. President, we on this side, as Senator Bunting has said, support all measures within the Constitution that will lead to a reduction in murder and a reduction in crime in the country. We note, for example, that Senator Samoda usually says, but some crimes are down. Well, we note that robbery is up. We know that murder is up. And these affect people directly in their face and have led to the fear and the trepidation of which I spoke last week. Mr. President, I also said last week that if we should listen to what the minister said about the number of illegal firearms coming into Jamaica, 200 per month, that's 7,200 for the 3 years since he cited those figures. Essentially, as I said last week, only 3 out of 10, every 10 of those firearms are recovered. Will this amnesty lead to an increase in recovery rate? I hope it does. But the absence of the public education leading up to this amnesty, and I thank Senator Langmore for trying to do a little of the public education a while ago. I thank you for that. But the reality is the government has really failed to lay the wicket and to prepare the country for this. I understand the rush. After all, I raised the issues last week. It's a month plus since we passed the law. So the government ought to be prepared with the public education, which was promised, Senator Samoda. And that has been a failing of the government. I wish the amnesty success. But Senator Webby, those of us like me in the trade union and you in business know that it's important to have key performance indicators, so we know whether we're going in the right direction or not. And so I'd like to ask the government, given that the minister is satisfied that a firearm amnesty may result in a reduction in the number of illegal possessed firearms, I'd like to get a sense from the government, if you can speak to it, Senator Samoda, as to how many guns you expect to receive from this amnesty. Let me say again, we support any measure, including the amnesty, that will reduce things. But how will I be able to celebrate with you and the nation success of this amnesty if we don't know how many guns you expect to get in? So if you're getting 5 out of the 7,200, is that a success? If you're getting 10%, 700, I'd love to applaud you. But the country needs to know with this amnesty, since the minister is satisfied that it will lead to a reduction, how many guns you expect to receive from this amnesty? I believe, Senator Bunting, you spoke about the international link. We heard about the Yardies and the passes, but not just in Florida, but recently in Turks and Caicos. There's complaint by the governor about Jamaica influencing the crime situation there. It's terrible. The issue for me is, what are our expectations? If a company board of directors was taking a decision on a matter like this, the data, Senator Webby, and which you and I agree, would be so critical. So tell me you don't know, and you operate on the basis of hope. And I will then quote Mr. Seaga, hope is not a strategy. So what from this tactical decision of the amnesty will we be able to mark success? So I ask, how many guns you expect? Turks and Caicos had an amnesty, I believe, recently. They got in 0, Senator Samoda. I hope we get in more than 0, plenty more than 0, because I want it to work. President, we're sitting here in this chamber today. I read during the week that in Trinidad and Tobago, school children were scampering from gunshot being fired in the precincts of the school. And I hope that we would never get into that. But I saw a story that this morning, not far from here where we're sitting in the Parliament, school children at Alpha had to be scampering because criminal gunmen decided to shoot at a motorist. Not far from this Parliament. I hope it never comes the day when it moves nearer to us. So we have to do something. And if this amnesty helps, so be it. Mr. President, when I spoke last Friday, I didn't know that 3 persons would be killed tonight in New Lincoln. I didn't know that a police officer, Senator Webby, would be shot in front of the largest police station in the nation, in front of Central Police Station. So I want this amnesty to work. But give me the numbers that your intelligence tell you you will get in. Give us so we may celebrate with you. Because as a stakeholder, as one who worry when my son or any member of my family drive out of the house, I want it to work. I want us to reduce the thing. But the government is failing and falling short if you can't give us a number. Hope is not a strategy against the criminals. And I'm not feeling the direction that will lead us. May the amnesty work, Mr. President. May it work. But you know, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And if we don't know the numbers of success, then people will claim success. So, come Sunday the 20th, when the amnesty would have expired, I hope you will announce that it was successful, and that Sunday afternoon. Otherwise, you have to admit that the great promise of us sleeping with our doors and windows open, and us waking up and still being alive, the great promise of something can be done to reduce the murders. A lot can be done to reduce the murders. And you believe that, we would certainly love to hear ringing in the bells, because you would be trumpeting that. Ringing in the bells. No, not falling in love with it. I'll tell you a story. I went to a PNP man funeral and I heard golden bells being sung about 5 times. No, I never want to join. I spoke at the Area Council one. But never want to join. But the key point is, no, never. Success marker, dash cam, your dash cam, your leaderboard. Tell us where we can find the success so we may cheer with you along the way. Because believe me, Jamaica need to have the criminals on retreat. But sadly, despite the great promises of this government, you're failing in the fight against crime. We need a national, not a partisan approach. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I too am hopeful that this amnesty works. This week has been a particularly traumatic week, with 10 people killed in the parish that I favor and speak about all the time. There was one person who was killed in an area, a community where I grew up, and where Minister Nestor Morgan also grew up. But even worse, Mr. President, is that that incident about which Senator Brown spoke, where the motorist had his car shot up and children were scampering at Alpha, that happened to a member of my staff who was dropping his daughter to school. And a motorcyclist rode up and shot in the vehicle for reasons which no one can understand. This young man is known as a peacemaker in his community. And I certainly hope that the investigations will disclose who perpetuated that act. But, Mr. President, we all deplore the acts of violence. And this month has been a particularly tragic month, where we have seen officers of the law cut down in their youth. I want this amnesty to work, and I am hopeful that at the end of it, the government will announce it as a resounding success. I have one concern, Mr. President. The licensed firearm holder, of whom Minister Samuda spoke, and of whom Minister Chang spoke in interviews, that is a person who has forgotten or been negligent in renewing the firearm on time. Under this resolution, it does not speak to the consequences, because the resolution makes it clear that that person must surrender to the Firearm Licensing Authority. But I'm wondering what surrender really means in the context of the Firearms Act and in the context of this resolution. And so I rise particularly to ask the minister, does that person have the license renewed? What happens when he takes in the firearm? We know that he will not, and notice I said he because women would be on time. So we notice, I couldn't resist that one, Minister. So what happens when he takes in the firearm, which he has failed to renew on time? What are the consequences? We know that under the resolution, he's not subject to prosecution. But does he surrender the firearm and that's the end of it? The fact that he won't be prosecuted, or will he be allowed to renew the license? That is a lacuna, I think, and we need to address it. I also would like to say that the policy as articulated by the government needs to be consistent. Because now seeing the resolution and seeing that it does not require for an attorney, for example, to note the identity of the person who was given the firearm, what Minister Chang said in an interview was that if this gun is found to be a dirty gun, it is going to have to be traced, and suggested therefore that the attorney would have to give information about the owner or the person who brought the firearm there so that it can be investigated. And I want to make it clear that I'm not supporting any criminal or any criminal intent or criminal activity. But I have to think about everything, all the consequences. And I wonder if this enunciation of the policy is a deterrent to persons actually bringing in a firearm. Because people can find themselves in a position of a firearm which they don't know has been used to commit an offense. People can, and I thought that was the sort of person who we were encouraging. In fact, an example which was given is that a young man who lives in a particularly violent community and gets a gun to defend himself and needs to get rid of that firearm could bring it in. But how would that young man, getting a firearm from a clearly an illegal source, know whether or not it has been used to commit, for example, a murder or a shooting. I want to know, this amnesty, as I understood it, would be for anybody who wanted to hand in a firearm, an illegal gun that they have in their possession. But I have to wonder, and I know I'm saying this twice, if somebody hearing, not knowing the history of the gun, and hearing that they are going to be investigated, it's going to be investigated, if that would make them enthusiastic about giving up that gun. And I urge the government to make the policy clear, because the policy as articulated is not clear. So, Minister, I am not being obstreperous. I am simply trying to assist in ironing out what I see are some problematic issues. And I really ask for your attention to this. If it pleases you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Scott-Munn. The Minister.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. I think I'll start at one of the smaller points while I wait on the lectern. The issue was brought up, I think, twice about the need for public education. I don't know how many colleagues listen to public radio these days, but certainly I know I've heard ads coming from the FLA. I've seen something published in the daily papers, and I know there's a public education and outreach effort being undertaken by the FLA to ensure that persons are aware of the opportunity that exists. That's one. Two, issue was raised around how the system would function, what operating procedures exist for the FLA, the JCF, IFLSM. I'll remind colleagues of Section 88 and Section 89, and I think 103, which speak to the registry which is to be set up. So I understand the question in the context that these sections have not yet been brought into effect. However, to note, the internal procedures have been outlined in the police force orders. IFLSM staff has been acclimatized and briefed accordingly, as have the FLA staff, and the appropriate management controls are in place. And we're satisfied that it will function accordingly. There's always risk, and even with the registry, there is a risk that human element could intervene, even when that effect comes in. But appropriate systems are in place, and it is a part of the force orders. The more substantive issue, Mr. President, is the discussion of metric of success. Mr. President, I remind colleagues, and let me make sure I quote it exactly. At B, declare a firearms amnesty if the minister is satisfied that at B it is in the public interest to declare that amnesty. Well, the minister, the government, indeed all of us on the side is satisfied that it is in the public's interest for this bill to come into effect. We are satisfied that the punishment must match the crime in the context of the scale of the problem which was spoken about by senators on both sides, that 15 years to life is appropriate for having an illegal gun. Point one. Point two, we are satisfied that it is in the public's interest, and it is a success in and of itself that we are giving the opportunity to those who are in possession of such a firearm with the opportunity to turn away from the potential from the criminal offense, especially after the date of November 19th. So, President, it gives the opportunity for families who intervene in the context of, mostly unfortunately, young boys who can now see a route to removing the firearm from their possession. Mr. President, anything that gets a firearm, a dozen firearms, 100 firearms off of the road is absolutely important and is a small win in a very large problem. But the more important point that we would want the country to understand is that this is more about the opportunity for those who do not want to get caught with an illegal firearm after November 20th, the morning of November 20th, to disassociate themselves, to disconnect themselves, and to divest themselves of that weapon. And for that, we stand behind the order here today. There is, if you look at all of the firearms amnesties, and I remember, certainly when I was at MNS and you were looking at the varying opportunities and the way they were used in other spaces, how it was implemented, what public education process was used, which ones worked, what were the reasonable things you could do based on our socio-cultural background, our historical context. One of the things that I found in my reading, and I'm sure everyone else has done their own reading, but one of the things that I found which was common was the lack of ability to predict how many weapons would come in. You saw in municipalities, in particular regions, in countries that had issues where it functioned conversely to how it was expected to. Some people built in significant capacity at police stations and got 1 or 2 weapons. They tried it in South California. Didn't work 1 year, slight change to the public education another year, and they were overwhelmed with the number of weapons when they had a particular gang conflict. So the reality is there is very limited room for predicting how many weapons will come in. But we've defined the success as the public's interest to have this opportunity to not come in contact with this law after November 19th. The other point, Senator Bunting, it's an interesting criticism of Dr. Chang's logical comment which pertains to law enforcement in any high violent crime area. If there is additional intelligence that puts police in natural positions of conflict with highly armed, highly violent criminals, when you have increased training and better trained in many cases police officers, there is likely to have armed conflict. And there is greater likelihood that you will have shootings. No, we don't want any shooting. But the reality is it is a logical comment which was made. Senator Brown says hope is not a strategy, but it is important. Bunting mentioned prayer against former and older discussions of divine intervention. The reality is that at 1,270 murders average over 25 years, any way you choose to articulate it, we certainly require blessings and help from the Almighty. We have seen a population which is not at war murder over 1,270 of its citizens annually. So I don't want to throw cold water on hope, but I make the point when you consider, we have to be careful to continue the politicization of this, because I've done it, you've done it, we've gone back and forth, and I say I in the broader context of JLP, PNP, opposition government. No, you've politicized crime, because I've had to dress you down in here and bring you back down to reality. The reality is, when you talk about and you obfuscate what Dr. Chang would have said, and I would have thought that if you recall, Senator Bunting, your time going back to, I think it was 2014, you would have had, and sometimes ministers have these misfortunes, things outside of your it's not your fault per se, but it happens during your tenure. You know what it is to have the other extreme, to have the extreme of Indicom having to launch investigation of death squads in Clarendon. What was said was a perfectly logical statement from Dr. Chang, and the statement should not be obfuscated, because if it obfuscates, it tends to morph and turn into other things. Mr. President, what is before us today is an important step, an important milestone in Jamaica's fight against illegal guns. This is the last chance for those who hold or are in possession of illegal firearms to avoid significant sentences. The issue has not been seizures, the issue has not been arrests, the issue has not been convictions, the issue has been length of sentences, Mr. President. There is significant data even to show that members of gangs cannot be rehabilitated in 3.5 years, which has been the average of many of our firearm sentences, Mr. President. This changes that. This gives us a fresh start in the war against illegal firearms. It's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, it's a part of a suite of investments, a suite of interventions, a suite of legislation which must come together for us to break the back of this scourge. Mr. President, I ask members to support the order before us. I conclude the debate and ask that it be approved. On which one? On the women being on time? Yes, we know, and I agree with her. So, a firearm license is not a right. There is no definition in any law that I've seen that declares it as a right. The firearm permit, firearm possession legally has always been discretionary. And I think that matter would be handled at the level of the FLA, depending on the circumstances related to what wasn't ready and dealt with before, as per requirements under the law now. With that, Mr. President, I ask that the motion be approved.
Members would have heard the question put forward by the Honourable Minister. Those in favour? Against? Minister?
Mr. President, might I ask for recommitment of announcements on the agenda?
The question is that the item announcements be recommitted. Those in favour? Against?
Also laid on the table of the Senate today are copies of White Paper Number 2 of 2022 entitled National Diaspora Policy, and it's published by the Ministry from National Policy, full stop, policy.
Thank you very much. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you very much for accommodating this tabling. Apparently, it had been sent for tabling in the lower house in error, and therefore, it is now where it should be for the scintillating and expansive statement that will be presented to us in due course. Mr. President, it has been a productive day. It's been an important day, and I think if we close on the note of this amnesty that provides the opportunity for a step change, that acknowledges that we're on the cusp of doing things differently as part of a suite of arrangements to bring a better, safer Jamaica. Mr. President, I think we will have had a very good day. So I ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Thank you, Minister. Just before we adjourn, I don't want to find myself in a position where our legal counsel, Ms. Shanae Cunningham, is not here. I'd ask her just to stand for me, please. Ms. Cunningham joined the staff of the Parliament over a year and a half ago, and during the short time that she has been with us, she has proved herself to be extremely useful. Not only to the teams, but to individual persons. And she is moving on. Stand up, miss. Stand up, please. So she's moving on in the normal course of things, and we wish her all the best in her endeavors. So we ask you just to recognize that she may or may not be with us next week. But I just do this out of and abundance. I can assure you where she's going, she's getting much more than doubling her salary. So we wish you all the best and thank you very much for the service that you have given us. The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned.